Which part of town do you live in, Chris?
I'm off of Via de Ventura and Hayden in Scottsdale.
Okay. And Jim, you're in Tempe, right?
Yeah, live in South Tempe, work downtown on Mill.
Okay.
Yeah, let's hope the Northeast grid is not down. I'm still looking at my internet out of my home office, totally being out. And Sean, I heard you talk about your dog barking in the background. I can hear mine just getting going because my kids just left. So
Yeah.
might have to throw him a bone real quick to appease him.
I just did that. But so I have a puppy, and so I have 2 rescue greyhounds, and then I've got an Italian greyhound who just turned 1. And I gave him the smallest one just now, and he knows that. So he's chasing the other 2 around. I thought, okay, I'll keep them calm, but I can hear them running around now.
Yeah.
It's almost nap time though, so we'll see.
All right. We'll see who gets interrupted first.
I usually get licked in the face. The puppy will jump up on me and usually lick me during these things.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a rescue as well, and she'll get pretty loud, and so you'll probably hear her as well. And but by the way, to those who are just joining us, good morning. Thank you for spending your morning with us. We're gonna wait maybe just one more minute for others to join us as well, and then we're going to start the morning scoop. Right, I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Welcome to today's morning scoop. As you know, higher education advocates believe that the university's new economy initiative best positions Arizona, our state, to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution, in which emerging technologies such as optics, robotics, AI, cybersecurity, engineering, and of course, biotechnology, among many things, will play a more and more dominant role. But how exactly? What is the return on investment? In which specific ways will the state benefit from this investment? So we have a great subject this morning. We have a great panel. But before that, I want to thank our sponsor for engaging with us in this way. Today's morning scoop sponsor is the Arizona State University. Under the leadership of President Michael Crow, who began serving in 2002, ASU has pioneered the way forward to building a new American university, one built not on the traditional model for university established in the 1700s, but a model built for today and for the future. Higher education that puts the student first, that is flexible and adaptive, a university that is embedded in the community, that reflects the diversity of the state of Arizona and that engages globally. In order to stay on that course, ASU operates based on a charter that was developed in 2014. Allow me to share it with you. ASU is a comprehensive public research university measured not by whom it excludes, but by whom it includes and how they succeed, advancing research and discovery of public value and assuming fundamental responsibility for the economic, social, cultural, and overall health of the communities it serves. Again, ASU, thank you for sponsoring this morning scoop. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Jim Rounds, who is the president of Rounds Consulting Group. Jim regularly provides advice to policymakers at the state capitol, to local officials throughout the state, and to public and private sector leaders. Mr. Rounds began his career as a senior economist and senior budget analyst with the Arizona Joint Legislative Budget Committee. And Jim, that's how long we're dating ourselves now, but that's how I came to know Jim. He is a senior fellow at the Goldwater Institute, a board member of the Maricopa County IDA, an advisor to numerous organizations, including Helios Education Foundation and the Arizona Board of Regents. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us is Chris Camacho, who is the president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. He has more than 15 years in executive management roles. Chris serves as president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, which, of course, if you don't already know, one of the longest standing public-private partnerships for economic development in the country. During his tenure, GPEC has led the attraction of more than 414 companies, creating 74,000 plus jobs and $11 billion in capital investment. He oversees the domestic and international business development and market strategies while serving as GPEC's executive leader in community interactions. He has particular expertise in emerging technology, tax policy, and international economic development. Previously, Chris served as president and CEO of the Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation. And in 2016, he was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to serve on the U.S. Investment Advisory Council to advise the Secretary on foreign direct investment policies and strategies. Chris, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chris. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I just said thank you. Good morning.
Oh, well, thank you. And finally, joining us this morning is Representative Shauna Bolick, who is the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Representative Bolick was first elected to represent Legislative District 20. That's right, Representative, right? It's LD 20. In 2018, she serves as chair, as I mentioned, of the House Ways and Means Committee. She also serves on the Arizona State Board of Education's Academic Standards Development Committee as a public high school parent and on the Early Childhood Education and Health Board. She graduated from Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs with a BA in Policy Studies. And of course, she completed her master's coursework at American University. She previously worked for then Texas Lieutenant Governor Rick Perry on his High-Tech Council, and she's a published author. Her book is called The Playtime in Phoenix, The Ultimate Guide to Learning and Having Fun with Kids. Representative Bolick, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Luigi.
I want to ask Representative Bolick first. I want to give you the opportunity to kind of give a short intro, if you'd like to, about the overarching theme of this morning scoop, which is how to best position our state with investment so that we can take advantage of the benefits of really what we call the new economy, but what many others call the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you to ASU and Luigi and Cap Times for hosting us this morning. I'm very privileged to be on this panel. Thank you also for that awesome introduction. A lot of people know that about 21 years ago, I helped Lieutenant Governor Rick Perry pull together his interim committee at the Texas State Legislature on the new economy. His interim committee was charged with laying the groundwork for future partnerships between public institutions and entities in the new economy. When I was invited to speak on this panel, I was asked to highlight some of the findings from my time back in Texas back in 1999, 2000. But believe it or not, the same recipe can be portable for other states that share a similar philosophy in promoting a pro-tech business climate, just like here in Arizona has been doing for the past decade, with various economic development groups, chambers, and obviously the state's Commerce Authority. Fortunately, Arizona shares some similar qualities with Texas. For instance, Arizona needs to remain steadfast and focused on developing and implementing policies that will help the state maintain its leadership in the new economy. Arizona also offers a friendly business climate by having fewer government regulations, so we see greater economic opportunities in a high regulation state. Over the last decade, Arizona has done a great job to encourage companies to relocate and remain here. In comparison to other states, Arizona has a good quality of life, vibrant school choice options, that's why I moved here, and more affordable housing than states where these companies are fleeing. Many technology companies fleeing high tax states and high regulation states are looking to relocate to pro-growth states, which have a less burdensome regulatory and permitting process. As chair of Ways and Means, I can attest we're looking at policies to improve the state's current tax rates so we do not become a flyover state to Texas. Excuse me, I actually just got a frog in my throat. So in any event, I believe that the legislature should be steadily focused on simplifying our current tax system to remain competitive with surrounding states. State government also needs to get out of the way and make government more efficient and user-friendly. In conjunction with some of these policies I've already outlined, it's paramount Arizona develop a more educated workforce. As a policymaker and a parent of two amazing teenagers, I have been a huge proponent of STEM and STEAM curriculum for students in K through 12. Turns out both of my kids have harnessed the STEM curriculum Both would like to be producers in the new economy as an engineer and potentially even a doctor. If we can graduate more students in these high demand fields, there's a good chance we can encourage these students to seek higher education or skilled crafts to further meet the demands and needs we face in this new economy. Before 2020, many public schools throughout the state lacked broadband or internet accessibility. The digital divide, as we know, has shrunk more quickly as a result of federal dollars flowing into Arizona to address this discrepancy. It's not only beneficial for our schools and regional economic development councils, but for our state to expand telehealth and medical services into rural and tribal communities. With investments made from federal dollars and rural broadband grants from the Commerce Authority, we're seeing more communities come online. With these initial investments in broadband, it's my hope that school-aged kids will not have to sit in a seat 7 hours a day or more, and they will be able to utilize this hybrid learning to meet their educational requirements moving forward. It's my goal for every school-age kid to have a subject matter expert in their classroom, whether that's at home or inside of the school building. It doesn't matter if that teacher resides inside of Arizona or Singapore or Korea. In the past school year, we've seen parents get a better understanding what their kids are learning. In many instances, I believe parents are demanding more challenging coursework that requires the critical thinking and better communication that we're going to be needing in the new economy. As a mom of a freshman who's over at ASU, I can tell you that I'm very much looking forward to this discussion this morning as we embrace the intellectual capital that we have right here in Arizona.
Thank you for that, Representative Bolick. To our viewers and to our listeners, I want to encourage you to ask questions if you want to, and you can do it via the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. I want to go to Chris. Chris, what is, from your vantage point, what is the broad picture for Arizona? Where is our state currently when it comes to attracting new kinds of professions and industries? As I mentioned, AI, robotics, advanced manufacturing, that really are the hallmarks of this new economy. Where are we at this point?
Well, Luigi, let me first level set you by referencing where we stood about this time a year ago, where we had massive tailwinds. We were growing as an economy. Our GDP, personal income, total job position was very strong. Obviously, the pandemic-induced economic downturn has led to pretty significant unevenness as we recovered. Now, all that being said, we're in a unique position here in Greater Phoenix and ultimately the state of Arizona, whereby there's a handful of states that are going to do really well coming out of this particular downturn. And Greater Phoenix and the state of Arizona are going to do really well. And so we expect that recovery to hit in full recovery between the third and fourth quarter of this year. Now, as it relates to advanced industries, this is like an ongoing competitive battle. So for you sports fans out there, it's just like we try to make the playoffs every year. And when you make the playoffs, you got to make a run. And I feel like, now that I've been at GPEC for 13 years, we're in this really highly contested race whereby these advanced industries and cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, emerging automotive, blockchain, fintech, all these aspects that Shauna talked about, we have to compete. And I will tell you, Texas is our number one competitor. So I always laugh when I hear, let's go beat up on California. It's like, we know California companies are going to expand out of California, relocate out of California. It's actually a race with Texas and now more notably Utah, Idaho, Denver. These kind of regions or these cities within these regions have become more competitive. So, certainly post-secondary and I'd say ultimately educational attainment is one key metric now that every human resource leader is evaluating. How are we preparing the next generation of students, not only to garner their high school and 2-year and 4-year degrees, but how are we teaching and adaptive learning models and really critical thinking skills around STEM that will enable us to meet the needs of, you mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. This pivot to digitization is now warranting us to think differently about our educational delivery system, think differently about how we build workforce development programs. And what I can tell you, I feel confident that our advanced industry segment as a portion of our economy will expand. And the projections are over the next 5 years that we will see anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 new advanced manufacturing jobs here in the metro alone. And statewide, as I talk to my peers, because again, I represent 22 cities here in Metro Phoenix, but again, peers in Yuma and Kingman and Flagstaff and elsewhere, we're continuing to band together with Arizona Commerce Authority to ensure that we're putting our best foot forward on our brand And then as Shauna talked about, ensuring that we have a pro-business policy environment, because again, we have to continue to enhance our regulatory and tax system. And I would argue simplify it and even make it more modernized to ensure that we can compete for these advanced industry projects. I'll unpack a little bit later the implications of Taiwan Semiconductor and a handful of these other projects. These are going to have vast implications and positive economic consequence over the next 20 years. But we must continue to produce STEM focused educational outcomes, as well as 2-year and 4-year degreed individuals to meet the needs of future commerce.
Thank you for that, Chris. I want to ask Jim, as you're looking around the country and as you're preparing economic analysis for other states, Chris mentioned that companies are looking toward what kind of a workforce development we really have. And I guess it boils down to how are we educating the next generation of skilled workforce? To what extent is that becoming more and more prominent? To what extent is that are companies asking that question more and more over the last couple of years?
I think workforce quality, there's an affordability component, but in order to improve the Arizona economy, we have to be talking about that really high level workforce quality, the higher paying jobs. And we're doing a much better job of attracting those businesses than we did before. Compared to some of the other states, I agree with Chris that some are going to be more competitive with us than others. There's some that are very forward thinking. Related to kind of just some quick economic foundations on what I think is our argument for building on this is I've given a lot of presentations over the years, and I was always fascinated by the discussion about can government be run like a business? And you can't run it like a business, but you can bring in basic business principles. And that got us thinking when we started doing some work on this new economy initiative and other projects as well. We were thinking, okay, well, what if we consider the taxpayer as the investor in a program? Is the taxpayer going to get a return on one of these economic investments? And that's where you start looking at return on investment statistics. And that's where you start doing a little bit more in-depth math. And I think Arizona is looking at this more aggressively in more complex ways, like this return on investment issue, than a lot of other states. I've seen reports in these other states, like you mentioned, where they're trying to be very aggressive in economic development, but some of them are good at what they do, but a number of them really aren't. You're seeing incentives that are far exceeding the benefits for the taxpayers in many cases, but we do it really well here. But overall, I think the main thing that I took from the introduction by Representative Bolick and Chris is that reference to the Great Recession. And really in studying the economy and fiscal policy and everything for a number of years now, up until the Great Recession, we had a pretty straightforward, limited economic development approach. We didn't really have many programs. When we worked with Kirk Adams' team on the jobs package, the initial report on that from back then, the guidance was recommend whatever is going to help the economy move forward. And so we were able to kind of take it to the next level. We got knocked on the canvas during the downturn. We were 49th in the country in terms of job growth at one point. And then we got back up and we're top 5 in terms of growth again. But we have to start growing in terms of quality. And I feel like this particular downturn identified some of these issues. Great fiscal management allowed us to retain extra funds so that we can maybe make some of these business type investments in the economy and yield that positive return for taxpayers. And that's pretty much the theme of the rest of the discussion today, the types of programs that we're talking about and whether or not they're going to have a good ROI for the state.
Thanks for that, Jim. I'm going to go to Representative Bolick, but before then, I want to ask Chris just a quick question. You mentioned several of our competitors like Texas, number one, Utah, I think you mentioned Nevada and Colorado. And I guess the question I have for you is that what happens if we lag behind? What happens if we're unable to compete? What happens if we're not nimble enough so that we're not able to take advantage of this new economy?
Well, Luigi, it's pretty simple. Our market will likely continue to see net migration of people, but we need jobs for these people as they migrate here. And this base industry position, as Jim alluded to, on the economic side, we say base industry. It means that we're producing product or services that we export. Well, we want to grow that vibrant base of those kind of companies because that creates massive economic value for the citizens of our state, and ultimately, puts a balance to the service sector economy, which again, Jim eloquently alluded to back in early 2000s. we were in a place where when we were growing, our revenues would look really good. When we were seeing net migration patterns of new people coming here and buying single family homes and using that resource to spend money in our local community, our state and local coffers were doing very well. Well, we learned that hard lesson in 2008. We fell off the cliff in 2008, and it lasted a lot longer in terms of recovery than we expected. Now, 100% agree that economically, from a diversification perspective, we're very different today. But I would say there's been some intentional decisions on policy, intentional decisions on this multidisciplinary approach that Arizona State University has taken. The downtown campuses with U of A, ASU, and NAU has really helped bolster the downtown density. All of these ingredients, including modern infrastructure and cities being nimble to meet the speed to market needs, they matter. So when ACA and our team and our cities and our utilities are out together pitching these companies, it's not one single bullet solution. It's a myriad of things that these companies analyze. And I will tell you, these companies care about certainty. They want to understand, is the policy environment going to be consistent? Do they believe that they're going to get the level of production out of our university system as in terms of advanced engineering and CIS capacity that they would get in Austin? I mean, these are the kind of things that, tried and true, they're measuring every step of the way, in addition to, do we have modern infrastructure, quality roads, quality recreational amenities, and so forth. So again, why I say it's a race, I don't think it's just let's throw economic incentives at companies blindly and try to win them here. It's not that. It's building a foundation of strategic investment across all of these areas over a number of years that have put us in this position. I do, however, believe Arizona is also at another crossroads where we've always been considered like a second tier base industries or technology hub. We're now pushing the limits of that second tier into the first tier. And the question in my mind is, where do we go from here? Are we going to make the right strategic investments like the New Economy Initiative that bolster our ability to compete with the Austins? I look at certainly places like Denver, Dallas, the upper Northeast. That is what we have before us. So I think we're in a really fortuitous position, but I want to make sure we're making the right intentional investments going forward.
And I actually wanted to
go ahead, Shauna. Yeah.
Jim had said before, he mentioned affordability with education. I believe within the last 2 weeks, the Arizona House, we passed out a bill allowing community colleges to offer a 4-year degree on targeted programs that meet target industries identified by economic development groups like GPEC. And when it comes to workforce development and lifetime learning, I believe our community colleges are going to be building these partnerships with the universities such as ASU. They are actually rooted in our communities. They can quickly adjust to whatever the labor market demands are. I've actually had a chance to go tour some of the community colleges around here, and I was amazed that they were able to offer different programs that will be actually addressing some of the new economy issues. Paradise Valley Community College has some different medical aspects that they're working on right now. If they turn it into a 4-year degree, that means that individual can get out there much quicker without the debt. I know a lot of people don't even want to go to school anymore just because of the looming debt over them. But relying on the partnerships between the universities and the community colleges, I believe that will help address some of the workforce demands of the new economy. People tell me all the time that sometimes the barrier to entry for them to apply for some of these programs is a 4-year degree. They might only have 2 years in, 3 years in. They're balancing their family, working a job. Mom gets sick, they have to take time off. But the fact is, now that we might potentially have these 4-year community college degrees partnered with U of A, ASU, NAU, that actually goes to also addressing some of the regional clusters that we see popping up. Like Texas, whenever I was there, we had lots of regional clusters, and there were very industry-specific incubators in those areas, and obviously the universities thrived. And I see that firsthand at ASU just because I have a freshman over there. And I've also toured over there and very amazed about everything that they offer, especially in the engineering department. They continue to attract all those awesome research dollars. They have award-winning programs. They very much, Michael Crow knows to focus on R&D. He and I both went to Syracuse together, so maybe great minds think alike, I don't know. But chambers of commerce, business and local governments, they need to come together on the cluster approach. And I know about 2 years ago, I had a chance, Chris had invited a bunch of us over to his wearable technology incubator. That thing was amazing. I went home and told my son, I said, hey, you don't need to apply to a college at MIT or Harvard or Caltech, because we were actually touring all of those schools. I said, why don't you go to ASU And he obviously wanted to go somewhere else. But I said to him, I said, you should take a look at the program. And we fell in love with the program. So, in our own backyard, we have amazing programs that I believe that are very worthy of investments.
Thank you for that. And Chris, I think you mentioned us kind of pushing the limits of where we're at and trying to get into the first year. The interesting thing is that the thing that popped up in my mind is that I play in a co-ed soccer league in Tempe, and we're always in the in that league we're in the C division, and we. A lot of times we'll win the championship in the C division, and we'll go to the B division, and then we'll just get massacred, and we'll be the last team, something like that. I want to ask, Jim. Jim, where are we good at? In which areas are we good at, so that we can, penetrate that first tier, and then I guess play with the big leagues.
Well, we're good at a lot of things. We have a much more dynamic and diverse economy than we had several years ago. And I would almost say that the argument is more not necessarily what we're good at, but what we could be really good at and what we could be great at going forward. And there's, Chris brought up a sports analogy earlier. So think about economics as kind of like the rule book, where the oldest economic idea out there, even older than supply and demand curves, is you have to increase your quality of life by increasing productivity. How do you do that? You learn how to do stuff and how to make stuff and provide services and trade. So the main thing is that we have to start advancing in terms of our broader ability to provide that high quality workforce and get the high wage jobs. If you get down to the playbook level, that's where we get to our public policy programs, and that's where we have to start thinking about those high return on investment things that I mentioned earlier. But I want you to keep a couple of statistics in mind. So remember 150 and 150. Our per capita personal income has been sliding in the greater Phoenix area and statewide, but it's stabilized. And we have an opportunity for this to start turning back up. So we have to shift from just quantity of job creation to quality. That actually helps everybody. It helps the state in terms of taxes. It allows us to be more efficient. But we have to add about 150,000 jobs, each making $150,000 a year, in order for that equation to just catch up with the US average. It's pretty similar when you look at average wages. But that would also make, one of the goals would be to catch up with some of our competitors. Utah is a little bit above us. And so we want to try to evaluate what has Utah done right. Even though they're not that much ahead of us, they've been improving. So their curve has been going up. Colorado has gone up and they're way ahead of us. What is it going to take for us to try to figure out how to catch up? And it gets back to productivity. It gets back to the foundation. Like, we don't want to just provide individuals with a cash subsidy. We want to give them a career ladder, and we want it to be as tall as possible. And we want them to encourage them to climb it. And then there'll have to be some personal will on their part to climb the ladder, but we have to provide that foundation. So I feel like we are doing a lot of things well. We're recruiting these huge mega businesses, these mega deals lately, the big projects that we've been hearing about. But to keep this going, I think we have to make some additional business investments. So again, we have to think about efficiency, but I'm always for looking out for the taxpayer and making sure that we're not giving away more than we're getting in return. So great optimism. This could be one of our best expansions ever coming up, but it's going to take a little bit of work, much like after the Great Recession.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I want to ask Representative Bolick, because you work under then Lieutenant Governor Rick Perry in Texas on his high-tech council. Tell us about that work. And I guess, when we think about Texas, we're really thinking, well, Texas is the top competitor in this field, and we want to be able to compete with Texas. I can tell you, for example, that I think they invested in, let me just pull it up real quick here. They invested, for example, $6 billion in their cancer prevention and research institute of Texas, $6 billion, which is a pretty darn big amount. But they made an investment thinking that what we really want to be is the hub for everything that has to do with fighting cancer, and so they're really forward thinking that way. So, Representative, tell us about why does Texas have this kind of mentality, and how can Arizona, how can we get to a point where, quite frankly, we're thinking like Texas to a certain extent?
That's a great question. So back in 1999, we sat down and we recruited some angel investors, venture capitalists, and different high-tech CEOs. Mind you, in 1999, the dot-com revolution was bombing out. So we actually had some dot-com CEOs on our board who basically could tell us some of the things that we shouldn't be doing as a state government, right? So we pulled together, I believe it was about 4 or 5 public meetings with everybody from Dell. Obviously, Dell was a big company back then, to Texas Instruments, IBM, and so forth. But we asked them, what should we do? Should we get out of the way? Do you guys need incentives? And it was obviously a mix of both. The issues were much broader as well, like addressing the digital divide, right? So different parts of Texas are so remote. They wanted to make sure that they were investing in broadband. There were certain areas like Houston that wanted to make sure that they became more of a medical incubator. So relying on different taxpayer dollars through the universities to make some of those investments. A lot of them are public-private partnerships that were out there as well. I have a cousin who's actually getting cancer treatment at one of those places right now because I have family in Texas. So Arizona, if we kind of did the same thing, which, we have folks like Chris Camacho and his group. We have the chambers who are very much involved. We have Jim, who's smart enough to say yes to doing a lot of these economic studies and passing them around. I personally believe if we had a group like that was working on some of these issues, we would actually have some forward thinking. You go do some different site visits to other states to figure out what they're doing right, use that as a recipe, come back. But we're not just worried about, domestic at this point. I think it's more of a global problem that we're going to be competing. Taiwan and South Korea, to name 2, who obviously have some of the intellectual capital and wherewithal of what they need to do. But I would base anything moving forward of bringing, some of the folks in the business community, some of the angel investors, venture capitalists. We don't have the same kind of angel investors and venture capitalists as Texas does. Not even now, I don't believe, compared to even back in 1999 in Texas. So I think bringing folks together on that end is always a good thing. And then obviously doing a lot of site visits and talking to smart people like Jim to make sure that we have the right recipe moving forward. Because as he has mentioned, throwing a bunch of tax incentives usually doesn't solve the problem at the end of the day.
I really like that comment.
Thank you for that.
Looking at other areas. When we were doing research after the Great Recession, we didn't recommend anything that was wholly new. We looked at pretty much every state, looked at the economic development programs, different things like that. And we made recommendations on what would make Arizona competitive in terms of tax policy in different categories, economic development programs, other things like that. So I completely agree with Shauna. You have to go out there and just try to take a look at what's working and then figure out what to bring back to your state.
Chris, I want to ask you about the idea of, targeted investments vis-a-vis the idea of government kind of getting out of the way. As you know, there are sort of 2 poles, right? 2 schools of thought. Maybe there are more schools of thought, but they're generally speaking, broadly speaking, there are 2 schools of thoughts, right? One says, let the private sector do what it needs to do and get government out of the way. And then the other school of thought, of course, is like, let's look at what's going on. Let's make targeted investments, maybe in certain places, maybe certain regions, maybe in certain industries, or maybe even a specific project, right? And the theory is that would create the vibrancy, the economic vibrancy that we're looking to, to create. What are your thoughts on that one, Chris?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my video just dropped here, so hopefully you can hear me clearly. So what I would say about that is, there's a combination focus that has to happen. So first of all, you can create an environment like we have here in Arizona, much like Texas, which can be limited government interference and allowing companies and entrepreneurs to not only start from a startup formation perspective, access capital, scale their enterprise here, and become our next kind of heralded Carvana or other company like that. At the same time, as these companies continue to grow and scale, they need talent. They need modern infrastructure. They need the amenity base that allows their employees to be happy and their company to be competitive. And so those kind of ingredients to both what both Sean and Jim mentioned, I think we've done a really good job of addressing many of these as we've gone on, kind of ledge cycle after ledge cycle. And at the same time, it was mentioned before that these global markets, we're seeing massive geopolitical shift in the United States, started with the last administration under Trump, is going to be carried forward with Biden in the focus on China and China's control of IP, and even China's investment to become the global juggernaut in semiconductors. And for those of you that spend any time with the semiconductor space, I mean, chips are going to be in everything. The digital momentum of connecting everything to the internet, there's really significant global implications of who controls that intellectual property and ultimately who can circumvent cybersecurity attacks against access to those technologies. So what I see on the horizon is unequivocally other Asian nations, South Korea, Japan, elsewhere are also making their own technology bets. But I think the U.S.-China clash that is happening is going to further propel companies to be on North American shores. And so I think it creates an opportunity, as I was talking yesterday with the consulate in Mexico, is that between the U.S. and Mexico, we could actually fortify this kind of ultra southwestern mega region around Baja and Sonora and the manufacturing base there, coupled with the southwestern U.S. market, whereby everything from automotive to fabs to capital equipment production, all of these things that are going to be in play that I think Jim said it well. In 2008-9, we wouldn't have even gotten looks by these companies. And now you're seeing TSMC, Apple, Google, all these other major enterprises picking Arizona because of the stability of the operating environment, but also because we're making some of these strategic investments in our P through 20 system, as well as Shauna mentioned, the Wearable Technology Institutes, the Blockchain Institute we have. We're allowing now, or we're supporting the ecosystem after graduation for these engineers to want to spin off ideas and create their own enterprises. And same thing with our engineers at Honeywell or Intel or elsewhere, when they have ideas to break off and address a specific supply chain need or new invention need, we're cultivating that environment where that early stage capital can be poured into these institutes and outside of these institutes to create Arizona-based IP. And I hope over the next 20 years, that's also what we focus on, because again, we can keep recruiting companies and we'll do well in that regard. But I also think we have to balance that with really supporting the ecosystem in our own community so that we become a vibrant place where venture capital, angel investment, and corporate strategic investment, wants to be. So again, some fundamental things that I think we need to address going forward.
Well, to that point, as we see some of these incubators take off and spur new businesses, right, like the wearable technology and the blockchain, I think as a policymaker, we also need to keep an eye on some of the privacy protection and put some in place. And I'm not saying that the government does it, but basically work to make sure that we're not allowing a lot of these medical pieces of information from patients to get out there. There was a rise of obviously increased medical diagnostic testing during the pandemic, and I don't believe that that they handled privacy all that well with people's medical records. Medical records, I believe, are very highly sensitive information, and some of it obviously was sent back to China because they were manufacturing some of the tests that we're using here with some of the incubators. But as a policymaker, I think we need to actually work to make sure that there's guardrails on some of the stuff that potentially is coming out of the incubators, to make sure that the public will trust us at the end of the day, as well as some of the new technology that's out there. The way that I'm looking at it, I feel that our medical information and some other information that's quite sensitive needs to actually be protected, because I think it's being used as currency in the new economy, and a lot of people have not signed up to allow that out there.
Thank you for that, Representative Bolick. I want to go to Jim. Jim, you did a study about the university's new economy initiative, and tell us about what the findings are. And I guess the overarching question that I have is, one, how do we trust these findings? How do we? I think one of in your study, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to see the return on investment starting at year 8, right? It's not even 10 years. At year 8, we're going to really start the investment in this area kind of equalize, give us a return that would pay for the investment itself. And 8 years is a very short time. But tell us what your findings are.
Sure. So we basically were asked to do an evaluation of each of the universities' budget requests as it related to the New Economy Initiative. Each request had different programs that were recommended. So the U of A had slightly different issues than NAU, and then we had some very specific requests from ASU. And you're right on the ASU portion. Our goal, when you look at when you get a positive return on investment on, say, an economic development deal, the state, if they're providing incentives, might want their investment back by year 5. Cities will go out to year 10. When you get involved in infrastructure, and that includes intellectual infrastructure, you can go out a little bit more. You can go out maybe 20 years. So that was our threshold. You have to kind of set a threshold to figure out if something's good or bad. Well, on the ASU one, we had the break even at year 8, and that excluded a couple of additional dynamic benefits that we didn't want to throw in there because we didn't want to overstate it. We wanted to be conservative. So it actually could cause a break even as early as year 5 or 6 with these additional benefits. But we need continued commitment. You can't make these investments and then pull back. So if we're going to commit to the new economy, we need to keep investing that amount in the new economy going forward. But I was pleasantly surprised with the outcome. I did not think that we were going to have any of the requests in less than 10 years because this is a bigger deal. This is a longer term play. But the fact is, we're going to have so many people graduating with ASU's request. We'd have one of the top engineering schools in the country. We're going to have higher wages. And that gets back to my point from earlier. We need to add a lot of high wage jobs just to catch up with the US average in a number of economic quality categories. This is how you do it. And for the question about how can we trust it? Well, we did the math. You can trust it.
And I want to just highlight some of those points, or rather, I want to just want to tell you really quickly what ASU is asking for, an investment ASU is asking for. ASU is requesting for a public investment of a total of $46 million for its workforce readiness initiative. That's $10 million to grow the Fulton schools of engineering, $26 million to develop and expand education programs, and $10 million to establish 5 science and technology centers, STCs. And your study shows that it will support 48,000, more than 48,000 jobs by year 10, 158,000 jobs by year 20. And over 20 years, it would generate nearly $80 billion in labor income, that's wages and benefits, that will be created and supported by this proposal. And that in turn would yield $177.8 billion, almost $200 billion in economic output. When you were looking at this proposal, can you cite an example of a state that did something similar in which over 10 years, 8 years, or 20 years that it actually yielded a kind of returns that you laid out in this report, in this study?
Well, we were talking about Texas, and again, they're the gold standard for having this hub where somebody says Austin, they immediately have something pictured in their minds, and it's high wage jobs, a tech center, really going up to the next level in terms of community. Colorado, the Denver region, we were comparing ourselves to the Denver MSA. Why is it that their incomes and wages have been going up so dramatically? That's going to be a case study that we'll be doing a little bit later. And so based on what Shauna said earlier, sometimes you have to look and see what other states have done well and mimic them, but you have to tailor it to our state's economy and also political environment. But overall, it still gets back to, are we going to get a positive return on investment? And no matter how we looked at these requests, and again, you start with, here's what the extra graduation, this is what's going to be produced in terms of new graduates. Is it going to help us continue our rapid pace of adding new higher wage jobs that just really started accelerating recently? And if you go through and you break down the analysis like we did, we listed each step. If you're a really innovative company, your best employee is probably going to be starting a whole new business within the next 5 or 10 years. Anyways, that's not picked up in economic models, but that's an effect that really happens when you're dealing with innovation and high tech and entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot of different ways to add to the economy. And all three universities' requests were solid. We had the return on investment with all three within less than the 20 years. But the ASU one, you're right, that 8 years, but it could be sooner. And do you trust it? Well, this is what's happening with other states. This is what the other states have implemented, and this is what we need to do to take it to the next level. Right now, literally this year and maybe part of next year, is that fork in the road. I always made fun of people for using that term fork in the road because usually there's more than a couple of different options. But in this case, if we start making these investments, these wise investments, good taxpayer investments, and we're aggressive, we will be a dramatically different state by the end of this decade, and it'll be on the positive side.
Representative Bolick, I want to ask you, ma'am, about if you can sort of describe the state legislature's approach toward request for economic investments like this one. And I guess the other question I have for you is that, how or when would you see the legislature make these kinds of investments?
Good question. I read the report too. I just had to show you that I actually printed it out and read it, Jim. Again, I'm gonna focus back to being a parent of a student who's in the engineering school at ASU. I love the outlook that ASU has. I remember reading the plan that came forth last year with all three universities. One thing that I would like to recommend to Mr. Crow is to make sure that all these students who are attending the engineering school actually have an internship set up for them. I believe if you want to actually grow your economy, one of the most imperative things is to work with the current engineering companies, technology companies, incubators to make sure that those kids actually are literally getting some workforce experience while they're in school. It's great that they have entrepreneur classes. It's great they're in engineering and math and science classes. But a lot of the kids that I've talked to, that's one of their main hangups right now is making sure that they have an internship. When it comes to economic development, it always becomes a budget issue, obviously, with looking to figure out where that gets plugged in. Most people know I'm a fiscal hawk and don't vote for many appropriations. But when it comes down to the budget and what is in the budget, I'm a huge proponent of making investments in programs such as these, knowing that the end goal is to make sure that our economy is vibrant and thriving. It's a trickle-down effect, obviously, whenever you have high-paying jobs here. And if the goal is 150,000 jobs at making $150,000 a year, it's going to take a lot of people coming together, angel investors, venture capitalists, the tech CEOs who are moving here from what other states to actually come to terms to figure out exactly what that looks like. And I cannot emphasize enough to make sure that those kids who are going through those programs actually have an internship along the way, because I know that that's not always being addressed.
Thank you for that. It's quite interesting because last mornings, a couple of morning scoops ago, we had students from ASU's Luminosity Lab, and these are really bright, very smart, very forward-thinking kids, and they really are just kids. But one of them already has a side gig, and he's already doing consulting work, and I believe he's finishing his master's degree. And is I thought about him and the other students as well when Jim said $150,000 job, right? And 150,000 jobs that that pay this amount. I kept thinking, well, boy, I'm in the wrong profession. Chris, I want to ask you the question about state investing in in requests such as this one. What can the state do to create a revenue base that can fund investment such as what ASU is asking for?
Well, Luigi, it obviously starts with the economy and what the economy produces, first and foremost. So what kind of dynamic economy do you have or not have? And I do think second, with a lot of great brain power, I'm hopeful in the next decade, we will take a look at the overall tax code and how we collect revenue. And I think simplifying it and probably making some changes to property, income, and potentially even sales taxes, the big three, how we collect the taxes overall and in the structure and approach in which we do, I think needs to evolve. Where, just again, as someone who looks at taxes every day with competitor markets, if we want the yield as an output to better position us to be able to invest in everything from education and transportation and all these other items, I do think that's one thing we're going to have to address, because we're going to keep bringing new companies and new people to market that will add to the diversification of the industry base. And I hope Jim's right that we evolve where the GDP per capita, the personal income per capita, continues to climb, because some of the challenges that again are still before us and have improved in terms of our metrics, but simple metrics like educational attainment, we don't generally cover a lot of this in our pitches, naturally to companies. But when you look at it from a civics perspective, the fact that we're sitting at just over 30% educational attainment percentage against these other places we compete with Colorado over 42% and Utah about 4 points higher, these are things that we have to fix. And as we fix them, we're going to have a more productive labor force. We're going to have less social costs. We're going to have less number of opportunity youth. So again, I think it starts with what kind of economy do you intentionally want to build? And I think, I give Kirk Adams and the previous governor, current governor, a lot of people credit for this, because there was a lot of minds that went into building this plan, Eileen Klein as well. And as that plan was put forth and executed, and the legislative leadership that came together, it put us on a fast track for the right kind of job growth. And I've said this publicly, and sometimes I get dinged for it, but I would hope that our mindset is that growth in terms of people moving here becomes additive to the base of economic activity that we have. Instead of it being the primer and the focal point, have that be the kind of additive blend to a base economy that attracts people from around the world and even retains, as Representative Bolick talked about, retains the best and brightest kids. And I 100% agree, too, that we need to ensure that the linkages with, I was talking with the CEO of Honeywell this past week regarding them getting even more engaged in K through 12 and even P through 20 for that matter, around apprenticeships and internships, and because they see the future and how competitive the jobs market is and is going to be across their manufacturing base and engineering, they're leaning in. So the more we can get, more enhanced companies to lean into this, the better throughput we're going to have, because then our future kids are going to, stay here and take advantage of those $150,000 jobs that Jim was alluding to. So that's what I see. And again, sorry for the long-winded response, but it's not just one thing we need to do. It's multiple intentional actions that put us in a position to win as an economy.
Hey, Chris, whenever I worked for Rick Perry, we had put forth an alternative recertification process to allow the engineers and mathematicians to actually go into the classrooms in K-12 and teach, which gets back to one of the points I brought up earlier with making sure we have master teachers of those core subjects in front of our kids, regardless of where they live in the world. And I just wanted to also comment on the tax issue. We are working towards a flat tax in the House, and I believe the proposal is about to come out. So stay tuned.
I'm sorry, can you tell us more about that flat tax proposal?
I just gave a teaser that it's coming out. I don't know if it's actually out yet, but we have been in discussion with the Senate and the governor's office. So it may or it may not be out already. I know the Senate released their version yesterday.
So once it's ready, do think about the Arizona Capitol Times. If you want to give us that scoop, I'm very happy if that happens.
And I will pass the torch to Mr. Thomas since he's leading that charge.
Oh, well, thank you. We will bug him as well. I think I want to go to some of the audience questions, and one of them is for Jim. Let me just find it. Jim, here's one question from Jack. Along with high wage jobs, we need approximately 5-1 support jobs for each. And can you comment on the role of CTE in supporting CTE, meaning career and technical education, supporting the high wage jobs?
Oh, it's critical. And one thing that Chris mentioned bears repeating, that there's a lot of other things that, are tangential to what we're talking about that have impacts. The poverty and attainment issue, very minor changes will impact, university activity later. But we do, let's say we started with 150,000 jobs and they're high wage. We're probably looking at around a multiplier, which is when people work at a company or the company themselves spend money, it creates, the money bounces around in the economy and it creates other jobs. And so at that wage level, we'd be looking at a multiplier around about 4. So Jack was pretty close. And that the skill set is going to be important for the supplier portion. So we're always going to have a need for people working at Walmart and McDonald's and other places. How you address that is you give them opportunities to get to a different ladder and then advance their career there, or even advance their career in their current one. But when you're talking about the higher wage jobs, you increase that multiplier value if you have the suppliers. So if we have a big company coming here, but they're buying all their stuff from California, actually they probably wouldn't buy it from California, but maybe it would be Texas now. They have a lot of their high value added inputs coming from another state. That activity is going there. So we need that here, and we're going to need a lot of the CTE education in order to get not only lure the suppliers, but also the main businesses as well. You don't need everybody at one of these big companies with a PhD in a particular field, but you need a lot that know how to do stuff. And I can attest, I learned a lot about economic theory in school, in undergrad and grad. It wasn't until I was really pressed by Stabnick at JLBC, my boss, that I really learned why we set up economic models a certain way, how these things work. And so what Shauna was saying about internships and having, different mentors, that's really important as well. It's so complicated, but if you break it down into bits, like the New Economy Initiative, what's the best way to get a return for taxpayers? Deal with that. What's the best way to deal with the poverty and attainment issue? Let's deal with that. We got to tackle these issues one at a time, but we can tackle them. We don't have to just do one, then wait for the other. We can do things at the same time. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, I think.
And Sean, and thank you for having your dog in Zoom with us. It's so nice. Yeah. And thank you for that. We just need to see pets sometimes. I think here's a question. I think any one of you can answer. As a mother of an ASU student and Tempe resident who supports investment in our state, how can seniors with experience be helpful in promotion and starting a second career? And I guess a lot of times we often talked about the kids, the children, are the younger ones who are going into ASU and other schools. What about the older ones, the not kids anymore? And how can they really take part in this new economy?
Well, I also think it has something to do with maybe their background as well. So, whenever you have, my mom, she never went to college. And after we all left the house, she started taking classes on her own to figure out exactly how to get involved. She started volunteering. And I personally think, seniors are some of our best assets out there. They've seen the real world in one dimension. Now they're living it through their grandkids' eyes, and they see the future. So I actually think it's a way to harness them, to bring them in, especially if they are done in Tempe. There's a lot of, I believe, opportunities down there. Even during the pandemic, I'm assuming that there's different projects to get involved in. I know when I was an undergrad at Syracuse University, we had a lot of people who were doing continuing education classes in our classrooms to keep their minds active, but they also wanted to be part of the community. So I think we should all embrace that.
And we only really have room for one more question. I want to ask Chris, and this is a question from me. Is there any good news on the horizon you can share with us? A company that's moving to our state or about to move to our state, or any project that you're working on that you think, will most likely happen?
Well, Luigi, you want to break the story here? Is that what you want?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I want. Yes.
Exactly. Well, here's what I can say, because we're under, bulletproof non-disclosures that I have to give away my third child if we talk about these before the company's ready. So unfortunately, I won't be able to break anything today, but I will tell you this is, we did announce a headquarters from Seattle this week that's moving down here to Metro Phoenix. In addition to that, you're going to see more suppliers tied to TSMC make their projects known here in the community over the next quarter. In addition to that, there's 24 out of the 304 projects we have. 304 companies are looking at Metro Phoenix, and probably many more beyond that looking at other parts of the state. But 24 of them are what I categorize as high-impact projects. These are semiconductor fabs to headquarter locations to 1,000-job financial services relocations to technology companies that are venture-backed from New York and Silicon Valley. So I'm really positive about what we're projecting for the next 6 quarters. Our numbers are up about 40% over last year, which is hard to believe. And you know, as I say that with such optimism, we do have to continue to embrace Main Street and small business, micro businesses, because they're still suffering, and certainly tourism affected, hospitality and you know, restaurants and other retail are still being challenged. But we're seeing a lot of exciting news, and the thing I talked with Sandra Watson about this past week, again, unfortunately, we can't talk publicly a lot about those companies, but the fact that we're seeing such high quality in virtually any company looking west of the Mississippi for a headquarters, advanced manufacturing, R&D unit, they're all looking at Arizona, which is, you know, what you wanted 10 years ago. And so, again, what propels me to excitement is, imagine 10 years from now, if we make these kind of investments like we're talking about today with the New Economy Initiative, we fortify the community colleges, and how the community colleges align with K through 12, I think is critically important. And I would say this, and a final comment too, Luigi, is, you know, I would hope that the broader market, to Shauna's last comment, embraces where in-demand jobs are going in terms of where are the jobs going to be, and let's train and upskill our people here in the community around where those jobs are going, whether it's a second career move. And I would just say, if you take a look at pipelineaz.com, go to that website, you'll see a myriad of career pathways with support from the Industrial Development Authority of the county and the county supervisors. They supported the build of this technology portal that allows, whether you're a student or you're a senior looking for a hobby, or you're looking at a second career, pathways of where future jobs are going to be. And I think it's what we need to embrace as a community as we shift to this next economy.
And with that, I want to thank Representative Bolick. Thank you for your time, ma'am. Jim, thank you for your time. Chris, thank you for your time. And again, I want to thank the Arizona State University for sponsoring this morning scoop. And to our audience and to our listeners, thank you for spending the 1 hour with us, and have fun. And I guess I'll say I'll see you around.
Hey, Chris, make sure you bring $4 billion in revenue so we can get rid of the state income tax.
There you go. That's a job for
We'll
you, Chris.
work on that. Thanks. We'll work on that.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye for now. Okay, bye-bye.